Hi and welcome back to the channel. We're doing something a little different, again, just to kind of like what I said in my most recent video about myself, just to do something a little bit different and keep my attention on something that is not my job. And I am just pulling up what I need to see. So what I'm doing is I watch the entire Tour de France not every single year. So I started trying to watch the entire thing back in 2022. Yes, so 2022. Obviously I haven't gotten quite all of it every single time. That one I definitely did see every single stage, and actually I didn't get up early enough yesterday or today thanks to all of the fireworks and just throwing off my sleep schedule. So I have not watched stage 2 today. So we are going to talk about stage 1. And before I get into this, what am I going to cover? I'm going to look at this from an average person's perspective. So I am not covering strategy or anything like that, or more so going to talk about what, as a normal person watching this, I'm getting out of it and the things that I find most interesting. So to start the stage, this was actually a loop stage to start and finish in the same city. And it started off neutral start like normal. They did have a breakaway right at the front. So for anyone not super familiar with pro cycling, had some riders take off at the front as soon as they get out of this neutral start. The first thing that happened though was that you had a couple crashes happen pretty early on in the stage. So that's the thing. I was kind of disappointed to see that Filippo Ganna is out of it, only because I watched from the 2022 Tour de France. If you watch the Peacock coverage, you have to see a lot of commentary, but you do learn some interesting things and get to hear from the riders sometimes. He was one of the ones I covered because the first stage that year in Denmark was a time trial. And so it does sound like he had some concussion symptoms after this crash that happened early on at what they call road furniture. I always find it so funny that it's called road furniture. I think we should use that in the US more though. And then you had a second crash, which was Stefan Biesiger, who also had an early crash. And so, excuse me. Hopefully both of them recover and are able to get back riding soon. I'm sure for both of them, it has to be just really frustrating to train and get to that point and then have something like that happen, especially so early on. And like the commentators on Peacock were talking about, like, Filippo Ganna has been a time trial specialist. I think that's the other reason I liked watching him, is that coming from triathlon background, I'm like, if I ever raced like road race, time trial is like where I'd be, because I'm personally not super comfortable in a pack, but I can also, when in shape, I can push some decent power for a while. So hopefully both of them will be able to recover quickly and get back to full health. So those were kind of the two things that happened early on. The stage was kind of boring. So for anybody not familiar with the Grand Tours, or specifically the Tour de France, you have the GC classification, so that is, or general classification, so that is your yellow jersey that everybody's familiar with. Your overall winner, that is the person that at the end of all 21 stages has the total cumulative fastest time. Then you have the points jerseys. So you have 2 points jerseys and the white jersey. Points jerseys are the green jersey and the polka dot jersey. So the green jersey is the sprint jersey. So that is, you get points for either the intermediate sprint or for the finish. So being the first person in the sprint being the first person to cross those lines. And then you also have the polka dot jersey. So that's King of the Mountains jersey. So that is being the first person to come over the top of a hill or of a climb. And this stage is not like, we're not into the big climbs. We're not in the Alps. So they did have 3 smaller climbs, but each of those only had 1 point each. At the end of the big ones, there are a lot more points, and like as people cross, like it's not just the first person get points, like the next people down get points as well. And same with the sprints. So I think the intermediate sprint, it was top 15 got points yesterday. So you have the points jerseys, and then you have the white jersey, which is the best young rider. So that's best rider under 23. So that is best cumulative time over the course of the tour for somebody under the age of 23. So like I said, the King of the Mountains, not super excited. I honestly wasn't paying attention to it that much because I'm like, okay, there's 3 climbs, 1 point each. It's early on. If anybody watched the one when it was in Denmark, you had Magnus Kort, who is actually not a climber, or like not like a climber, like doing like the big Alp climbs and winning those. But when he was in Denmark, he actually went for all those points climbs in Denmark that were smaller and had the polka dot jersey on for a while. So that was fun to watch back then. What did happen though that was interesting is, so I believe it was either the 2nd or 3rd climb, you did have a crash. You would think I would know to pull all this stuff up beforehand, but of course I did not. So it was Benjamin Thomas, who is a French rider. I can't remember what team he was on. Who's Cofidis. And let's see, Benjamin Thomas, Matteo Bircher, trying to say the names right. I'm also listening to Peacock, so I could be saying these wrong because I say it how they do. So the 2 of them at one of the top of one of the climbs, so they were both going all out towards the top of this climb. Nothing dangerous done by either of them, but it was a cobbled section, and Benjamin Thomas' rear wheel slipped out from under him and actually ended up crashing into Matteo Bircher. So there was a crash at the top of that climb. Peloton was about 30 seconds or so behind them. It was not far behind, because they had been in a small breakaway for this one King of the Mountain point. So thankfully they both got up from that. I haven't seen anything saying that they were seriously injured, but I'm sure that hurt. And hopefully they were able to recover and be back riding today. So that was the last major crash that I saw. So overall, like nothing like that took out a whole group of the Peloton, because I think that's what a lot of people think about when they think about pro cycling. If they don't watch a lot, is you do have a lot of these crashes that take out large amounts of people because of how tightly packed people are in the Peloton. I do think there was one more small one later on, and I do know that at some point, I know one of the riders I wanted to follow this year was Remco Evenepoel. So he won the white jersey last year. I do know that he finished pretty far behind. So overall, I'd say not the most exciting stage to watch. I did like watching the 2 sprints, so I was really happy to see Biniam Girmay, who was the rider who won the green jersey last year. I saw him, he came in 2nd overall at the stage yesterday, and can't remember who won the intermediate. This is how close of attention I pay attention. I'm trying to learn more of the names, but I'm not perfect. So overall, I'd say not my most like exciting stage to watch. It was definitely interesting to watch. Obviously, at the start of the coverage by Peacock, there was a ton of coverage of your top 2 contenders for that yellow jersey. So that is going to be Jonas Vingegaard and Tadej Pogačar, and they're both great riders. I really want to see somebody else win, only because I think it'd make it more interesting. Remco Evenepoel was definitely on my list for that after his performance last year. I really enjoyed watching him in the time trial last year. And then my other pick is actually, I'd really like to see Primož Roglič do well this year. So when I watched, the first year I really followed was the 2022 Tour de France. And in that year, Primož was on the same team as the eventual winner, Jonas Vingegaard. And the reason I want to see Primož do well is that he had a crash. There was just a really bad stage for that entire team. You had Jonas have a really bad mechanical. He grabbed somebody else's bike that was way too big for him because they didn't have their team car close enough. They traded bikes again. And then I believe Primož had a bad crash and actually dislocated his shoulder. And so you already had a team. I think it's tough. You have a team with 2 GC riders on it. And I do think it is difficult because eventually the team, even if that hadn't happened, they were going to have to make a decision at some point of who are we actually working for in this case. So it's great to see him actually on a team where he is the GC contender, and I'd really like to actually see him do well and on the podium this year. The most exciting thing in yesterday's stage was definitely the finish for me to watch. Throughout the race, you get to see some pretty strong riders up at the front, and I like seeing kind of who's out there, names I recognize from watching previous races. So early on in the race, we saw a lot of Quinn Simmons, who it is exciting as an American to see some of the American riders up front. I want to say there are only 5. So Quinn Simmons rides for Lidl Trek, which is also one of the only US sponsored teams, Trek being a US bike brand. So it was fun to watch him up front, really pulling on the front of the peloton for a while. But the more exciting part up front was to watch near the finish when you had the Alpecin team led by Matthew van der Poel at the front. The reason that was more exciting was that you knew what was coming. So that was going into the final sprint. So Matthew van der Poel was pulling for his teammate Jasper Philipsen, who is their sprinter. And so you had I want to say at one point 4 of the Alpecin team up there all kind of setting the pace. They had the peloton had been split at that point, so they had they had a group that was about 30 seconds behind them, and they just really did not let up on the pace. They kept that group from catching them. So the way it works is that because these sprints can get so dangerous, and they obviously want to protect their GC riders, they do have a rule that if there is a crash if you cross the 5 kilometer to go mark with a pack, you get that pack's time. If you have a crash or mechanical, or at least a crash, I don't know about mechanical, if you have a crash within the 5K to the finish line. So they kept their group together through that 5K mark. They kept the other group off the back of them, and then they really set the pace out front. It's always really interesting for me to watch the tactics at the front because I don't know how they decide how they're going to do it. And one of the things that really impresses me is your person that's leading out the sprinter. So in this case, Matthew van der Poel for Jasper Philipsen, how they manage to pull their rider up and then how quickly they can actually safely swing off to the side to get out of the way to let these big groups of sprinters through. So that's always really fun to watch. It also makes me really nervous and stresses me out a little bit to watch them, just because I know how tightly packed they are. And even just from riding with groups locally, I can see how dangerous that could be, just because if one person makes the slightest wrong move, you've just crashed a bunch of people. So really impressive finish to watch. Those last 5 to 10K, I think were probably some of the best racing I got to watch yesterday. And then of course watching Jasper Philipsen, who ended up taking the win. I also really enjoyed getting to see them talk about some different sprinters this year. Obviously, they talked about Jasper Philipsen, Biniam Girmay, who I wouldn't say came out of nowhere last year. He definitely was not somebody that the commentators in the US had picked for really winning everything that he did last year. So really impressive racing from him last year. They kind of did the same thing this year. They're like, oh, he's kind of had a slow season, but he came out in 1 second yesterday and I think did pretty well in the intermediate sprint as well. So really great to see him performing as well. And then the one name that surprised me not to see, but I also have not followed pro cycling super closely, is I felt like the last couple years we talked a lot about Wout van Aert from the Visma team, and he was not really mentioned yesterday. So I don't know if that's a strategy by Visma that he is not going for these sprints right now or what, because they obviously are going to be focused on Jonas trying to win the GC. And then the other thing that surprised me again though is it sounds like, again, Visma has other strong riders that could potentially have been GC riders. So it is also interesting to me, that strategy there. Yeah, overall, good stage. Definitely not the most exciting. Couple crashes early on that hopefully, again, those riders, Biesiger and Filippo Ganna, are getting to recover and not dealing with any long-term injuries, as well as the 2 that crashed at the top of the climb. And I am looking forward to watching today's stage. obviously I overslept, so I will be watching it later. Which the only good thing about watching good and bad is if you watch it later, you have to deal with, like, I feel like they insert more commercials into the coverage, but it also works out for me that I'm gonna turn it on while I'm at the bike shop today. So I will get to watch stage 2 from the bike shop because it should be finishing up here in Nashville in about like the next hour or so. So by the time I'm at the shop in 2.5 hours, it should be ready to watch. And I will come back tomorrow with my commentary of stage 2 and see how long I can keep this up with. I would probably not talk this much every single time. Again, trying to give a little bit more background for anybody else that, like me, does not follow pro cycling all the time, but really enjoys watching it when they do. So that is it for this installment of, I don't know what I'm gonna call this, average cyclist talking about the Tour de France, talking about how absolutely like astounding it is to watch these athletes. Yeah, not sure what I'm gonna call this. Something along those lines, I'm guessing. Just because that's what it is. I'm giving you the average person's view. Tomorrow, I want to talk about their kids and why I think we need some new colors in the Tour de France.